If it's Wednesday, President Trump tries again to twist arms and push his sweeping agenda bill over the finish line, meeting at the White House with leadership and a key group of hardliners in a last-minute push to de-escalate a Republican revolt. Plus, President Trump confronts the president of South Africa, forcing the leader to watch a video in the Oval Office about what the White House alleges is genocide against white Afrikaners, despite official denials from the South African government. And the Justice Department moves to end civil rights investigations in cities with high-profile killings by police officers. It's pulling back federal oversight of police amid major changes at the Justice Department. And welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Aaron Gilchrist in Washington. We will get to that highly unusual Oval Office meeting today in just a moment. Let's start with another piece of breaking news from the White House right now. For the second day in a row, President Trump is getting personally involved in trying to push his massive tax and spending bill over the finish line in the House. Republican leadership was hoping to vote today, but with a very narrow majority, right now Speaker Johnson doesn't appear to have the votes. At this hour, members of the House Freedom Caucus, along with Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Scalise, are meeting with President Trump at the White House. That meeting comes after hardline members of the Freedom Caucus said earlier today they're making progress on the bill, but they're not on board just yet, and they want more time to push for additional spending cuts.
So we're going to work with the president today. We're going to work with our colleagues to deliver, but there's a long way to go. I want to be very clear. We've got to deliver on what we're talking about, or we're not going to be able to get the bill done. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
The leadership will have to figure out, what the time frame of this is. As you know, I've come and I've spoken to several of you in the past few days and said, I'm not sure this can be done this week. I'm pretty confident it can be done in 10 days. But that's up to leadership to decide. We just want to emphasize, we want to deliver the president's agenda.
While we don't know the specifics of the Oval Office meeting, President Trump earlier today said they were close to a deal. In contrast to the Freedom Caucus, House Republican leadership wants this bill to advance now. The Rules Committee began a marathon markup session at 1 this morning. That is still going. Exactly what's in the bill is still being negotiated, but broadly, it will increase funding for immigration enforcement and the Pentagon. It extends the expiring 2017 tax cuts and temporarily ends tax on tips and overtime, all Trump campaign promises. It also raises the cap on state and local tax deductions after a deal hammered out with some blue state moderate Republicans. It all is paid for by cutting funding for clean energy, food assistance, and Medicaid. Those Medicaid spending cuts will come from adding work requirements and barring individuals with unverified citizenship from the program. Now, the Congressional Budget Office says those changes would cause more than 8.5 million people to lose their health insurance, something Democrats are already sounding the alarm over. NBC's Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill for us. Also with us now is senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Sahil, I'll start with you here. Where do things stand right now? What do we know about how this meeting is going that's underway at this moment? How many holdouts are there in the Republican conference?
Yeah, Aaron, broadly speaking, it's all up in the air right now. Speaker Johnson does not have the votes for this bill, and this meeting is President Trump and the White House's attempt to corral the votes of these conservative hardliners in the Freedom Caucus who have emerged now as the single biggest obstacle to passing this bill. They are unhappy with the fact that it increases the debt by more than $2 trillion, which goes against everything they say they believe in. They argue the bill got worse overnight when Republican leadership cut a deal with a group of blue state Republicans to increase the state and local tax deduction, the so-called SALT deduction, which these conservative hardliners don't believe in, and which is going to cost money and make the bill into something that they think is worse than it already was. What they want to do more of is steeper spending cuts in the form of Medicaid work requirements and rules. They want to move that up. They want to repeal more of the clean energy funding that was passed by Democrats in the Biden years, some of which was done on a bipartisan basis. And all of this is being done as House Republican leaders are working desperately to preserve the votes of those moderates in swing districts who are already being forced to cast very difficult votes on Medicaid cuts that are unpopular in their district. Still, Speaker Johnson said he wants to get this done by Memorial Day. Take a listen to what he said.
Look, we're going to have a discussion at the White House about that, and we're trying to get the bill in its best possible form, and we're trying to meet our deadline for the votes. The President's called for it. We've been saying this for many months, that we would do it before Memorial Day.
And Aaron, time is certainly running short for Speaker Johnson on that Memorial Day goal. It's unclear he'll be able to get it done by then.
Well, Kelly, let me bring you in here. What is the White House offering the Freedom Caucus here? What's sort of on the table for this meeting?
Well, certainly the president is trying to use the force of his personality and the success that he has had in persuading those who support his agenda overall, and using the sort of constituent connection that they share in common, many voters who put these lawmakers into office, as well as giving the president the power to sit in the White House. And so this is really a huge test for President Trump, because he has, in many ways, this is his big legislative agenda. Typically, when presidents come into office, and of course, this is his second term separated by a 4-year gap, but having that first initial legislative victory is something that typically happens, especially when a president also has control of the legislative branch, which he has very narrowly here. So the stakes are high for the president. He wants to maintain the tax cuts that were a part of his signature achievement, as he would describe it, in 2017 of lowering taxes. Those, of course, sunset this year. That's why it is urgent. But some of the divisions within his party you find are sort of the typical divisions you have, those that are really more concerned about that debt issue than the president typically is himself. And then you have those who believe that effectively taxing citizens who pay a state or local tax, it might be their property taxes, it might be their income taxes, having that not be deductible fully is something that lawmakers who represent those higher tax areas believe is effectively taxing the same income twice. That's one of the arguments they make. So they feel they've got a lot on the line. So that's what makes this particularly difficult, is it is deeply reflective of all of these lawmakers and the president about what they said they would do here in Washington, which is why there's so little space for compromise.
Well, Sahil, we made the point that the Rules Committee started meeting at 1 o'clock in the morning today, right? Leadership seems to want a vote on this as soon as possible, as we've been saying. Why the seeming rush on this?
Yeah, Aaron, it's been 15 hours since the Rules Committee met to start reviewing this bill, and they still haven't voted it out. There are a ton of amendments being filed to this bill, including many by Democrats, to try to highlight some of the provisions that they oppose and to try to strip them out. There was one Congresswoman, Teresa Leger Fernandez, a New Mexico Democrat, called it the Vampire Committee, saying that they're going to suck away all the health care from Americans in the middle of the night. That is, of course, referring to the Medicaid cuts, which is the singular focus of Democrats when trying to attack this bill. But in terms of the deadline, the Memorial Day deadline, that is a self-imposed deadline by Speaker Johnson. His attitude is to put these deadlines out there because he believes it helps get the ball rolling. What Republican leaders don't want is for this to just hang out there and for members to go home for a recess and get an earful from their constituents and then decide maybe we don't want to support those Medicaid cuts. Maybe we don't want to support the clean energy cuts, which, by the way, a lot of that funding goes to red states and benefits them. At the end of the day, Aaron, there are only two deadlines that really matter here. One is the end of July deadline, which the Treasury Secretary has said is necessary to prevent a default on the national debt, which would be catastrophic. They have to raise the debt limit through Congress in order to prevent that. And the second, the one that Kelly just mentioned, end of the year, the Trump tax cuts expire. That would be a massive tax hike if they allow that to happen. Everything else is noise. Everything else is self-imposed deadlines by Republicans for political purposes.
So, Sahil, very quickly, if the stars align and this bill does pass the House, it then has to clear the Senate, of course, right? What's the early outlook there?
Exactly right. The early outlook there is Republican senators have made abundantly clear this is not going to pass in its current form. So if Speaker Johnson is struggling this much to corral this narrow House majority before senators even touch it, that indicates that it's got a long, long way to go because it's going to have to come back to the House. There are a lot of things, big and small, that Republican senators want to change. There's also this push and pull, this rubber band between the hardliners who are insisting on steeper spending cuts like Ron Johnson on one hand, and then a bunch of others like Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, even Josh Hawley of Missouri complaining about the Medicaid cut. So it's going to be a long, long road, even if it does pass the House, Aaron.
All right, Sahil, thank you. We appreciate your reporting on this. Kelly, stick around for us here because we want to turn now to that extraordinary Oval Office meeting with the South African president. He is the latest world leader to have a tense meeting with President Trump at the White House with cameras rolling. President Cyril Ramaphosa came to Washington in hopes of smoothing over tensions with the Trump administration, including a recent decision by the State Department to fast-track refugee status for white South Africans based on claims they were victims of race-based violence. The Oval Office meeting quickly devolved into President Trump amplifying unsubstantiated claims of mass killings of white South Africans and essentially ambushing Ramaphosa with a video the White House says shows proof of violence against those white Afrikaners. President Ramaphosa, who at times looked uncomfortable seated next to President Trump, tried to push back, tried to defend his government as President Trump continued to make the claims about the situation in South Africa. Here is some of their exchange.
Our government policy is completely against what he was saying, even in the parliament. And they're a small minority party, which is allowed to exist in terms of our constitution.
But you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can take land.
And then when they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
No. There is
nothing happens.
There is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately, through criminal activity, are not only white people. Majority of them are black people.
You're taking people's land away
we have not.
From them. And those people, in many cases, are being executed. They're being executed. And they happen to be white, and most of them happen to be farmers. And that's a tough situation. I don't know how you explain that. How do you explain that? They're taking people's land away, and in many cases, those people are being executed.
Now, to be clear, there is little to back up these claims by President Trump. While South Africa did pass a law that allows the government to redistribute some land, it was part of a push to address the disparities stemming from apartheid. According to the organization Action for Southern Africa, 72% of farms and agricultural holdings are owned by white South Africans, who are only about 7% of the population. And according to the New York Times, of the 225 people who were killed on farms in South Africa between April 2020 and March 2024, more than 100 of them were black farmers, while 53 were white. Back with me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, we talked about this a little bit earlier today in some of our special coverage of this meeting. Have you seen an Oval Office meeting like this where a U.S. president confronts another world leader with a video like we saw today? How did the South African president handle that situation?
It was extraordinary. I don't recall ever seeing something like this before. And certainly when leaders come together, they usually reserve the most heated disagreements for their private conversations, not the portion where the media is included, which typically is establishing that a meeting is taking place, allowing some greetings, perhaps some discussion of what they hope to accomplish in a meeting, all the things we typically see. This had the feeling of President Trump having a very specific concern and an issue that, as you described, we don't have a lot of information to back up the claims that he's making, and effectively ambushing a guest in the White House from another country with this information. The South African president, Ramaphosa, he certainly tried to argue point by point with President Trump, and we know that can be fraught as well. Awkward, to be sure, but also can sometimes make things go even more uncomfortably. But he held to the notion that there are rights for people to speak about these things in his country, that it's a very minority party, that the government does not take land in a broad way. You just described with some additional fact-checking there. And so he tried to defend his country. The president was also asked, what could the South African leader do to resolve this, or what would the president need to see to learn that there is not a genocide in South Africa for whites? And he could not answer either of those. So this appeared to be an opportunity for the president to raise an issue that has been certainly getting to his attention. He's already removed funding for South Africa from the United States earlier this year. Secretary Rubio has said that the U.S. does not intend to participate in the G20, which is being hosted by South Africa this year. So definitely some punitive measures toward South Africa. The South African leader extended an invitation for a state visit to South Africa. The president didn't respond to that. So this was tense. And one of the big questions is, where was the information coming from that formed the president's opinion?
And there were some other topics today as well, Kelly, in that Oval Office appearance. Our colleague Peter Alexander tried to press the president about the Pentagon's confirmation that it is, in fact, accepting a luxury jumbo jet from Qatar. Is the administration at all concerned about some of the questions that have come up about ethical and security concerns related to this decision?
They've rebuffed those. That question came up just as it was breaking. We've been talking about the airplane issue for a week or so, but now the Department of Defense says it will receive that as a gift. One of the concerns is in the Constitution, there is a prohibition against foreign governments giving something to the president or to an office holder. So perhaps housing it as a gift to the Department of Defense is a way to get around that prohibition in the Constitution, which was intended to not give foreign governments the ability to buy favor or influence with the U.S. government. The White House has completely dismissed those concerns. They have argued that this is something that the nation of Qatar wants to do on behalf of just simply a gift for the president that he would use as Air Force One. There's also been talk that it would eventually go to the Trump Presidential Library. There are serious ethical questions about this, but the White House maintains it's not a concern for them.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell for us here in Washington. Kelly, thank you. And coming up, immigration lawyers and the Trump administration in court today at issue the latest case of migrants being deported to a war-torn country in violation of a court order. First, though, I'll talk to a House Republican about where his conference stands on the GOP's mega bill as President Trump hosts several key holdouts at the White House. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. All eyes are still on the White House, where President Trump is trying to get a consensus among Republicans for his so-called big, beautiful bill. Joining me now is Republican Congressman from Colorado, Gabe Evans. Congressman, we appreciate you making some time today. President Trump is meeting with some holdouts from the House Freedom Caucus, we know, at the White House right now. Are there any changes on the table that they could agree to in this bill that would change your support for it?
Well, I think we're continuing to negotiate all of those things, but at the end of the day, we're going to get this bill passed because of the things that it does. These are the things that the American people want. In my state, Colorado, this is tax breaks for the bottom 84% of wage earners. This is extending the child tax credit to families with kids. This is making sure that taxes don't double on our small businesses and they can continue to compete with large corporations on an even footing. And so what this bill is doing is so incredibly important to Americans that I'm confident we're going to reach a point where we can get this thing passed. Anything that's worth doing is, of course, going to have some fine details of negotiation involved because we are the party of free thinkers. We want to get the policies right, but we're going to get this thing passed.
I do wonder if you've heard from your constituents in Colorado about this to any degree. Are they concerned? Did they come to you and said, you know, here are the pros and cons that we see?
Well, I know one thing that folks in Colorado are concerned about is the fact that in my state, you got 51 million taxpayer dollars going to illegal immigrants through programs like Medicaid and state health care programs, again, funded by taxpayers. And so at a time where we've got a lot of concern around access to health care, this bill, by cutting out the fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicaid, by strengthening the program and increasing spending, let me be absolutely clear. The Republican program increases Medicaid spending every single year. We're just going to be more efficient with it by cutting out that fraud, waste, and abuse, those 1.4 million illegal immigrants that the Congressional Budget Office says are currently receiving taxpayer benefits. That's going to make the program stronger and more efficient for the people that truly rely on it and truly need it.
Let me ask you this. As we talk about Medicaid, you referenced that. According to an NBC News analysis, about 20% of adults under 65 in your district have Medicaid or another means-tested form of coverage as their only health insurance. Are individuals that you represent going to lose any care at all because of this package, folks that you represent?
No, we're going after the fraud, waste, and abuse. If you are a lawful beneficiary of Medicaid, we are fighting to protect that. We're fighting to put Americans first in this program. Again, that's by cutting. These aren't my numbers. These are CBO's numbers. 1.4 million illegal immigrants are currently receiving this taxpayer-funded benefit. You got 1.2 million folks who are not eligible for Medicaid, but who are siphoning money away from actual lawful beneficiaries because Biden-era rules didn't allow states to actually go and scrub their Medicaid rolls more than once a year. And so through reforms like that and by asking able-bodied working-age adults with no kids to either work part-time, volunteer part-time, or go to school part-time, 20 hours a week, again, we can bring some good stewardship of taxpayer money to this program while protecting it for every single lawful beneficiary.
So you mentioned a couple of things there I want to ask you about. First, the CBO. I want to put up some numbers from the Congressional Budget Office. They say this bill would add roughly $3.8 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. They also say it would decrease the household resources of the lowest 10% of earners while growing them for the top 10% of earners. What do you make of that? Are you okay with that?
So that $3.8 trillion increase, unfortunately, that's money that's already been spent by the previous administration. That's just how the federal budget works. So if we don't increase the debt limit, then we're going to be defaulting on our debt. This is money, again, that's already gone out the door. I spent 12 years in the Army. I have no idea why the Army uses a Navy term, but we would say big ship, small rudder. It takes time to turn a big ship around. And so this debt ceiling increase, that gives us the time to turn the deficit spending in this country around without defaulting on our debts. And again, that's money that's already been spent and is out the door. In terms of who this bill benefits, again, we can go through the numbers. The bottom 84% of wage earners in Colorado are the ones who take the standard deduction. If you're a millionaire, you itemize. Bottom 84% takes the standard deduction. We are protecting the standard deduction at its current rate rather than allowing it to be cut in half. That benefits the bottom 84% of wage earners for your average family of four to the tune of over $2,000 in Colorado. By protecting that child tax credit, preventing that from being cut in half from $2,000 to $1,000, again, we're putting more money back into the pockets of everyday hardworking Americans.
Let me ask you this. I want to put up a line from your congressional webpage that says, our country is spending money we don't have, leading to inflation and the always growing national debt. Reducing and eventually eliminating the budget deficit is critical to long-term prosperity. So yes or no for you, does this bill reduce the federal budget deficit?
I'll look no further than the committee that I sit on, the Energy and Commerce Committee. Again, we were tasked with protecting Medicaid for lawful beneficiaries and also cutting out fraud, waste, and abuse. That fraud, waste, and abuse is deficit spending. Our instructions were $880 billion. There was actually so much fraud, waste, and abuse that we found in all of the different programs that fall under the jurisdiction of Energy and Commerce. Again, a committee with the broadest jurisdiction of any of the committees in Congress, that we actually found $100 billion more. We found over $980 billion in fraud, waste, and abuse. That's deficit spending that we can reduce while at the same time continuing to spend more money every year on Medicaid, just focusing it on the people who need it by cutting out taxpayer-funded giveaways to 1.4 million illegal immigrants, 1.2 million people who aren't even eligible for the program.
I do want to ask you about one other topic before I have to let you go here in just a second. The defense secretary, we learned today, has accepted this luxury jumbo jet from Qatar for President Trump's use today. Your Colorado Republican colleague, Jeff Hurd, said that he had some serious concerns over this whole deal. Do you share any of those concerns?
Well, I think you used the correct term there, and that's deal. We're in a time right now where trade deals and international relationships between the United States are being negotiated around the world to get us back to America First policies that make sure that the United States is not being taken advantage of in these foreign relationships and these foreign engagements. And so for things like the jet that you referenced, we've got an army of lawyers that are going to scrutinize every single component of that to make sure that it is done legally and lawfully. But I think that that's indicative of a broader phenomenon that's occurring, which is where the United States is once again respected in the international community. I spent 12 years in the Army. I deployed overseas. I know that the rest of the world respects strength. We are once again negotiating from a position of strength.
So it sounds like, as far as the Secretary of Defense is concerned, this is a done deal. You have no concerns.
Well, like I said, you're going to have an army of lawyers that look at this and examine this, and I think that as long as the lawyers sort this thing out and say that this is lawful, to me, this is indicative of the United States, again, being respected in the international community and the fact that we're, again, negotiating from a position of strength.
All right, Congressman Evans, we do appreciate you making some time for us today. Thank you so much.
Always good to be on with you.
Now, before we go to break, Washington is mourning the loss of a longtime member of Congress today. Democratic Representative Gerry Connolly of Virginia died this morning after battling esophageal cancer. That's according to a statement from his family. The top Democrat on the powerful House Oversight Committee, Connolly served in Congress for more than 15 years and was a fixture in Virginia politics for decades. Connolly was known as a pragmatic leader and a passionate advocate for federal workers. In his last of many appearances on this program, Congressman Connolly had a frank answer when asked what Democrats can do to counter the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress.
Well, we can enter into litigation. We can mobilize the public. We can use the bully pulpit. We're in a reactive mode. We're in the minority. The American people decided to give a trifecta to the Republican Party, and this is the consequence of that. But that doesn't mean we're powerless, and it doesn't mean we're moribund or supine, and we're not going to be. We're going to be very outspoken. We're going to look at situations like this where they have overreached, and we're going to strike back. And that's what we're doing. I'm doing it right now on your program.
Major developments today in the federal government's oversight of local police departments. The Justice Department announcing it's dismissing proposed reform agreements known as consent decrees with the Minneapolis and Louisville police departments. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division also plans to close investigations into 6 other police departments across the country. The head of the division calls the consent decrees, which were reached during the Biden administration, overbroad, and claims they limit police departments and local officials. Louisville and Minneapolis plan to continue police reforms independently.
We as a city are committed to reform. I am committed to reform and improvements. Chief Humphrey is committed to reform and improvements. To ensure that the promised progress continues throughout Louisville Metro government, we are moving forward with the community commitment, Louisville's consent decree.
We're doing it anyway. We will comply with every sentence of every paragraph of the 169-page consent decree that we signed this year. The bottom line is this: people should expect us to do this work. People have been demanding for years that we do this work, and we're not going to let them down.
Now, this comes nearly 5 years to the day of the death of George Floyd. That case sparked nationwide outrage and the push for police reform across this country. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins me now. He's been tracking this. So, Ken, first, remind us what the terms were in the now former agreements with the Louisville and Minneapolis police departments.
Well, Aaron, each one varies, but essentially in all of these cases, the Department of Justice comes in to a police department, does an investigation, does a statistical analysis, and then makes conclusions in some of these cases that there was racial discrimination, that there was a pattern of excessive use of force, that there was other kinds of violations of civil rights. They put those findings on the record, and then they try to reach an agreement with the municipality, in this case Louisville and Minneapolis, an agreement monitored by a judge to put some reforms in place. And it can go into hiring practices and stop and frisk practices and all manner of the way the police departments are run. Now, what the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights said today is that she doesn't believe that this was done in the correct way. And she thinks that the Department of Justice can't stand behind some of these findings. And so they are actually retracting them in the case of those 6 cities that you mentioned that are under investigation. And they're withdrawing the consent decrees in the case of Louisville and Minneapolis, which had not yet been approved by judges. And she said she's reviewing about a dozen other consent decrees across the country. This is a real sea change. it's standard and usual in a Republican administration to see less aggressive civil rights supervision of police departments. That's normal. What's unusual here is to actually withdraw agreements that were already in place made by the previous administration, but that's what's happening.
So, Ken, do you have a sense of what the immediate real impact of the Justice Department's announcement today is?
Well, it will vary by city. As you just heard there, the officials in Louisville and Minneapolis are saying, look, we like these deals and we're going to keep abiding by them. And in fact, in Minneapolis, they have a separate consent decree with the state. So there's a number of rules in place. And a lot of times the mayors or the heads of these municipalities use these consent decrees as leverage over the police unions, which sometimes are resisting some of these reforms. So it really will depend city by city what the departments decide to do, whether they continue on with the reforms the Justice Department has been proposing or whether they walk away. But in general, this is taking the pressure off policing nationwide to do the kinds of reforms that the Biden Justice Department thought were warranted.
All right, Ken Delaney in for us today from the DOJ. Thank you, Ken. Let's turn now to the courts and the latest legal battle over the president's deportation agenda. During an emergency hearing yesterday, immigration lawyers said at least 2 of their clients from Myanmar and Vietnam were being deported to South Sudan in violation of a court order. That order barred the administration from deporting individuals to a third country. The judge didn't order the plane to turn around, but he said any migrant in DHS custody could not leave U.S. control once the plane landed. Today in court, the judge said he believes the Trump administration violated his previous court order barring the government from deporting individuals to third countries. Joining me now is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, who's been tracking this story for a while now. So, Julia, what happened in court today, first of all, and is it clear what happens to those migrants going forward?
Well, look, there was a pretty strong opinion here when we heard it verbally, and we're about to get it in writing any minute now, Aaron. This judge, Judge Murphy in Massachusetts, said that the administration, the Trump administration, violated his preliminary injunction that he issued previously when they tried to send people to Libya, another war-torn country, that said that if you're going to send an immigrant to a country that is not their own, you need to give them enough time so that they can review the country and be able to appeal to the government to say if they have a reasonable fear of persecution or torture if they're sent to that country. And Judge Murphy said in this case with South Sudan, it might not be that these people even know about the conditions in South Sudan. They might have to have some time to Google it, to talk to their lawyers. And that the time that they gave him in this case, these 8 men, looks like it was about 17 hours. He says that that was not a reasonable amount of time. What the Justice Department said is that neither this judge or the Supreme Court or any other court who has talked about reasonable time before deportation has actually defined what that time period is. What we do know is they've left the United States. These 8 men are still in DHS custody, but we don't even really know where they are.
So if we zero in on this point about the judge feeling as though his order has been violated by the United States government, is there any sense of whether there will be repercussions as a result of that violation?
Yeah, I mean, what the attorneys for these men want, the plaintiffs' attorneys in this case want, is they say that these men need to be brought back to the United States so they can consult with their lawyers and make the arguments. But DHS is saying that these are all convicted murderers, rapists, have done an enormous amount of very violent crimes, and that these people shouldn't be afforded those rights, and instead we should be talking about the victims. But a lawyer today for the plaintiffs had a very good salient quote saying that it doesn't matter what these people have done, that there is no human being on earth that should be subjected to torture. In other words, the U.S. penal system obviously agrees to prison and to people serving their time, but not to torture.
I want to ask you, too, the State Department, we know, has a warning, a level 4 do not travel warning for South Sudan. How are they then squaring sending migrants to a country that they say is grappling with incredible violence and instability?
I asked that exact question today to the acting director of ICE at a press conference. They very rarely do press conferences, but I got the chance when they said, we have the right under the Immigration Nationality Act to send people to safe third countries. And so I said, well, is South Sudan a safe third country? And they said, I'll refer you to the State Department. Now, the State Department, of course, put out what you just said, telling all Americans not to travel there. And it was a sharp juxtaposition today to have the president and the Oval Office talking about South Africa being unsafe and now saying South Sudan is a place to send migrants.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you.
Thanks.
Still ahead, the countdown to New York City's mayoral race, where voters are facing a crowded Democratic primary field, and the frontrunner is now facing a federal investigation. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We are just 5 weeks away from New York City's Democratic mayoral primary, and former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, the clear frontrunner in the race, is now facing an investigation from the Justice Department. House Republicans requested the investigation, claiming that Cuomo lied to Congress about his actions as governor during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, you might remember Cuomo's daily pandemic briefings, where he gained national attention for his criticism of President Trump's COVID response in his first term. The investigation presents a potential example of the Justice Department's willingness to go after the president's critics. In contrast, just last month, Mayor Eric Adams of New York City, an ally of President Trump and Cuomo's chief rival in the race for mayor, saw his corruption charges dropped. The mayor's race is Cuomo's attempt at a political comeback, as he resigned as governor in 2021 after being accused of sexual harassment allegations that he denies. Joining me now is law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter. So, Tom, do we know the focus of this new federal investigation?
We actually do. It's kind of a rare thing that we would know the focus and the reason why specifically a federal investigation would be open like this one. And that's because, as you alluded to, Aaron, this is a referral from Congress. In this case, James Comer made this referral. He's got a subcommittee going on the response, the government's response to COVID-19. And Cuomo testified. You're looking at a photo of him testifying at it there sometime earlier. And so in the course of that testimony, the claim, or the statement rather, from Comer is that, in fact, Cuomo lied to Congress, which is a federal crime, Statute 18 U.S.C. 1001, and that he did so willfully. And he cited three specific examples, all surrounding what's been referred to in New York circles and referred to in this referral to the Justice Department as the July 6 memo, a memo about what happened at the nursing home. And Cuomo is asked whether he had any sort of feedback over it, any sort of edits, whether he reviewed it, and he effectively said no to Congress. However, there are emails that paint what some have called a very different picture, effectively saying in one email communication, one staffer sending an email to another saying this has got the governor's edits on it. So that's just one of the things that they highlight in this criminal referral.
So this is happening during a campaign season. We can't help but to note that just last month, the Justice Department formally dropped all the charges against the current New York City Mayor, Eric Adams. As you sort of juxtapose those two things, what's the significance of this investigation and the timing of it?
I think one thing we have to keep in mind is that this was a referral in late April from Comer to the Justice Department, and it's Congress that has to make that referral. Had the Justice Department decided today to just pick up the phone and say, hey, we're going to investigate Andrew Cuomo, I think that there would be some more eyebrows raised as far as the timing of that, in light of the facts that you laid out with respect to New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who, of course, is running for re-election, and Cuomo's bid for mayor as well. However, since that referral was just several weeks ago and the investigation did not just start yesterday or today, this has been going on for some time. I think there's some folks that have been asking about the Justice Department so-called 60-day rule or 60-day window. That's just a rule, but on something where it is referred to the Justice Department, those rules don't always necessarily apply. So that's something that we have to kind of keep in mind here. The clock is a little bit different given the nature of the case, given the fact that it's a referral from Congress, Aaron.
All right, Tom Winter with us today. Thank you, Tom. Now, as we noted, Andrew Cuomo is the frontrunner in the upcoming Democratic mayoral primary, but it is a crowded field with at least one candidate trying to take advantage of New York City's ranked choice voting. A 33-year-old self-proclaimed socialist candidate with minimal name ID but major money backing him is taking the unusual step of asking his supporters to donate to a rival. Joining me now from the big board is national political correspondent Steve Kornacki with a deeper dive. Hey, Steve.
Yeah, hey, so, I mean, we're talking about this situation now with Cuomo and potentially these charges, or at least this investigation. Before all of this broke, we can say Cuomo was in a very good position here. He may still be in terms of pulling off this political comeback. Take a look. This is a Marist poll. This is the most recent poll we have here of this Democratic primary. You mentioned Eric Adams a minute ago. He's not running in the Democratic primary. He's talking about running on a third-party line in November. So you had Cuomo out in front here by by 2-1. But you just mentioned Zoran Mamdani, the socialist candidate here, and this was the significant news in this poll. All of these other candidates had sort of been jumbled together. Mamdani now has bumped up into a clear second place, attaining separation from the rest of this field. Again, Cuomo still leading him 2-1, but the way things work in New York with this ranked choice system is you go in and you vote in this primary, you're going to see all these candidates. They ask you to rank them. This is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice. And then the tabulation proceeds in rounds. At the end of the first round, whoever's in last, that name gets dropped. They reallocate the votes for that person based on the voter's second preference, and on and on and on until somebody hits 50%. So long way of saying this Marist poll actually played it all out. So you see, when you list all the candidates, this is what they came up with. Now, as they start working their way through the tabulations, this is what happened. Cuomo, 45-23. Round 2. Round 3, he's up to 46. 4, he's up to 48. You see how they keep knocking one off each round. And then in round 5, in this version of it, Cuomo would cross 50%. Mamdani would still be in second place. And that gap between them would never really change. They actually played this out to a 6th round, but it would end here if somebody crossed 50% in the actual election. So it's an interesting dynamic because for Cuomo, if Mamdani does emerge as the clear second place candidate in here, then this suggests that as odd sort of as the system is, as complicated it is, it's not that chaotic, actually. It's pretty orderly as they work through these rounds. And I think if you're Cuomo and Mamdani is your main opponent here, your chief rival, you kind of like some of the internal numbers here. Let me show you what I mean here. Look at this. It's New York City Democratic mayoral primary. White voters are not a majority here. They are definitely a plurality. And actually, that's where Mamdani does best. He's only trailing by Cuomo by 2 points among white voters. If you look closer in these numbers, Mamdani does best with voters who call themselves liberal, very liberal. He does best, as we say here, with white voters, higher income, college educated, all of these things. You look at the black vote, this is more than a third of the electorate in the Democratic primary. Look at that. Cuomo at 50%. Mamdani isn't even in second place there. 2-1 for Cuomo among Latinos. This is where the majority of the votes are in the Democratic primary in New York City, not among white voters. So Cuomo is drawing strength from the groups that are the largest in this primary. Now, finally, that piece about DOJ here and what effect it could have on this race. We'll see. Does it shine a light on Cuomo's COVID handling, raise concerns there? Does that hurt him? Or does the fact that this is coming through the Trump Justice Department, is that the lens through which Democratic primary voters filter this? Because look at this in this poll. How do they want a mayor to handle President Trump? Democrats, 3/4 of them want opposition as much as possible to Trump. They might just view this as a politically motivated move from the Trump administration and rally around Cuomo.
All right, Steve Kornacki with us today. Steve, thank you. We appreciate it.
You got it.
We have much more news and politics still ahead. The panel is up next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It has been a very busy day in Washington, so let's get right to our panel. Joining me now on set, Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters. Juanita Tolliver, author of A More Perfect Party and an NBC News political analyst. And Jay Shabria, partner at Mad Global Strategy. Where do we start, Jeff? I guess we start in the Oval Office today with what we saw with the two presidents seated there. President Trump showing this video that he claimed was proof of genocide in South Africa, with the South African president sitting right there. He didn't really offer much verified information in that moment. What's your read on the moment, on what we saw today in the Oval?
So I'm just coming here from the White House, and I have to say my first read is that President Trump was prepared. It was an orchestrated onslaught, and that video was played on a TV screen that is not normally in the White House Oval Office. Right. So that's planned. 2, the South African president was also prepared. I made some comparisons in the story that I wrote about this between this meeting and the Zelensky meeting in February, right?
100%.
The difference, though, is the South African president did not engage. He was calm. He was poised. He said, this is something we can talk about. He also pushed back against some of the false claims that the president made. So he came in ready. And the last thing I would say in terms of what he came in with was he brought a golf book to the president, and he brought some white golfers. And that was also strategic.
Let's talk about those white golfers, though. So, you know, I watched a lot of what happened in the Oval Office today, and Retief Goosen, the great golfer, was there, and Ernie Els, too. And the President Trump asked Retief Goosen about what he saw. And Retief Goosen recounted a story about his father's friends who have been killed or their farms that have been burned. And when I went to prepare for the segment and I started reading a little bit about the write-ups, not one mention of Retief Goosen's story was presented. So again, I think what's happening here, what the president masterfully does is he pits these bad actors against the press, these bad actors against the elites, and he's done it here again. So this is not mentioned. Retief Goosen's, the only place you're ever going to find about Retief Goosen's recount is on the president's website, his X account. And it's one of those things that just was amazing to me.
We heard several reporters in the room ask the president, what's the point of having this meeting? What do you want to see the South African president do as a result of coming here to the White House and talking about this and then presenting the issue to him as they did? And the president never gave an answer about what he was hoping to have happen.
Well, I think it was clear what he hoped to have happen. The ambush or the onslaught, the reality TV style environment that he created. I'll point out the only other difference between this meeting and the Zelensky meeting is that Trump didn't have backup. Marco Rubio was not in the room this time to help double down, or J.D. Vance was not in the room this time to back him up.
I think the president did pretty well today.
But the reality is, I think the South African president also level set his expectations to not realizing any change in terms of U.S. trade relations with South Africa or avoiding tariffs, which are being levied, right? He understood that this was a bit of a joke. And so he could quip in this meeting, we don't have a plane to give you, referring to the Qatari plane and potential favor in that relationship that would come from that.
And I do want to talk more about the plane in just a second here. Jay, I will give you the last word on this, and then we'll move on. If you think that a world leader is responsible for a genocide happening in his country, why invite him to the Oval?
Well, I think he wants to shine a light on this. I mean, this is what this president does. He shines lights on things that are often underreported. Last summer, if you remember, we were told that there were very few apartment buildings in Colorado that were occupied by Venezuelan gangs. What do we find out? It is happening. We do this all the time. MS-13 is prevalent in this country. He shines a light on these things. And all of a sudden, the base, the Republican base, but also independents, they start to get outraged by it, and policies changes start to happen. This is the president doing that once again. It's a masterclass.
So I want to add to that briefly, though. You can't ignore the facts. And the facts are that the vast majority of crime and murder that happens in South Africa is against black South Africans.
So where do you get those facts from? That's my question. I mean, look, again, last year, 2 years ago, we were told the facts were that President Biden was completely okay. The expert class
I'm not sure how those two things are related.
Well, they're all related because these are experts that are in South Africa that are telling us this. I don't know that we actually can trust the experts, the expert class anymore.
Okay.
All right. Well, I want to talk about some other topics here too, but so we'll leave that there for this point. We referenced the luxury jet that is now being accepted by the United States Department of Defense from Qatar. We heard the defense secretary has made that decision at this point. We know that some Republicans on Capitol Hill don't like the idea. Jeff, do we anticipate, though, that there will be some pushback? We had a congressman on earlier who seemed to say the lawyers are going to look at this and they will make the decision about whether this is going to go through.
I think the facts will show that over the last 3 months, there hasn't been a great deal of pushback by Republicans on the Hill against what President Donald Trump wants. And I think that will probably be the same case here. However, that doesn't mean that there won't be some questions. Certainly, there are some ethical questions being raised by Democrats and by some Republicans. But my guess is that there's not going to be a big sort of opposition from the president's party about this gift.
I do think that the friction will come into whatever investment it takes to ready this plane to be Air Force One, which has been estimated upwards of $1 billion, on top of the 2 planes that Trump already has contracted Boeing for about $4 billion. And so I think that this is absolutely a moment where even if they may not ask those questions now, it'll come down the pipe when he's going to be seeking appropriations for exactly what he's asking for, if it's even possible to do that within the next 3 years while he's still in office.
I want to play a piece of video. This was, again, from the Oval Office today on this topic of the jet.
I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you.
I wish you did. I take it. I would take it. If your country offered the United States Air Force a plane, I would take it.
So, Jay, what do you make of that? I mean,
Well, I'll give the South African president some credit there, too. I mean, he went in the Oval Office and he learned how to play the president's game, and the president played it back, too. I think that's a pretty humorous moment in that whole exchange.
So simply a humorous moment, not a suggestion about the deal being made or
I don't think so. I think it was ribbing on both sides, and then they were both playing the game there.
The only evidence I'll push forward against that is that Trump has made it clear he's pay to play with this dinner party he's hosting tomorrow night, where people who purchase his meme coin will have access. 25 of them a private audience with him. He is pay to play. I think he was.
And that was my question for you. I mean, how much do the optics matter in the world that we live in right now? Does it matter? How does this look to the public when we're talking about jumbo jets being traded like this?
I think clearly it looks badly to the public, as it overshadowed his entire foreign trip last week or the week before. It was a constant in front of the public. It'll again be a constant in front of the public when they point out the wasteful spending that comes along with this acceptance of this gift, this push for it to be retrofitted to have missile weapon systems and other protections required to transport the president and other members of his cabinet. That's where it's going to be a burn for regular people who are at a moment when they're experiencing the effects of tariffs and rising costs. Also, when they're facing cuts to essential programs like Medicaid and SNAP, which impact them on the day-to-day. And I hope Democrats make it plain about the differences in their reality and the wasteful spending coming from Donald Trump.
Got a few seconds left, Jeff. I'll give you the last word on just the analysis of this moment.
You know, I think that as far as the plane is concerned, it's something that the president really wants. I think as far as pay for play, just follow the news, follow the stories and what he does.
All right. We are out of time today, but I appreciate you all coming in and sharing with us. Jeff, Juanita, Jay, thank you all. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now. Stick around.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.